Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome into Tom Curran's Patriots Talk podcast alongside my buddy Phil Perry, who's always alongside and does an unbelievable job for us and makes the pod what it really is. Phil, we have director Matt Hamachek from the Dynasty, the Apple Plus TV documentary that's coming out 10 parts. And as I wrote in a quick review for this, my 2-sentence synopsis is, it got every bit as bad as we told you, but it's even better than you remember. Meaning there are two different, the first 5 and the last 5 episodes really of this series encapsulate how incredible the Patriots and improbable their rise was and how dysfunctional the ending was. It's amazing, isn't it, to watch all 10? And you might have only watched the first 2 so far.
I've only watched the first 2. We're doing dynastic recap shows on NBC Sports Boston every Friday for the next several weeks. And we're doing 2 episodes at a time. And so I am really just zeroed in on these first 2 episodes, but what a great job they did. And I'm not just saying that because we're about to have Matt on the podcast here, but there is so much new stuff, even for somebody like me who's covered this team for over 10 years now, who followed it really closely as a fan who was of age at the time that this documentary covers. And there are so many new clips, so many new sound bites. There's on the field sound that I find fascinating that they were able to even acquire somehow that they use.
And this is just from 99, 2000, 2001, and even going back, because they're setting the stage. So this is stuff if you didn't hear it here, you're never going to hear it again. Sorry,
there's stuff from Belichick's days with the Browns that I had never seen before, where he's, some pretty wild scenes that are on camera that they're able to bring to light with this documentary. If the first 2 episodes are any indication that just how it's produced, they did such a fantastic job, and they provide so much new stuff. So if you're somebody out there saying, man, I've consumed everything there is,
yes,
I've read every book, there's new stuff here, and I think you're going to appreciate it.
Yeah, it's like an archaeological dig. You go down and find the artifacts. And, honestly, to put it plainly, I've been there the whole way through. And because I was the age I was and the stage of my career that I was, I feel as if I was really attuned as much as anybody in the media could have been to what was going on and why it was going on. And a lot of my career is based on the success of the team. And I understood that in a very elemental way. So everything was recorded in here. And now I'm reliving it 24 years later and seeing it and how it unfolded. So there's an ownership, but there's stuff you see from Brady behind the scenes that we didn't expect to see. Home video footage shot on a toaster that you get to, experience from his condo in Franklin, which we, did work on last year, 3 years ago when he came back. But there's so much of this that I look at and recall and compare it to my recollection. And that is one thing that we're going to talk to Matt Hamachek about, as we're just about to bring him in, is these first 2 episodes, they don't necessarily coalesce with my recollection of how things were in 2001 when it began. But we're going to get into the nitpicking, even though it's minor, in a second. But let's bring Matt in and talk to him about a little bit of the process and everything that went into it. John, that's your cue. Where's the guy?
Here you go.
Hey.
There he is.
Here we go. Tom Curran.
And that's Phil Perry, who is my great friend and colleague. You might have read his stuff here.
Yeah. Awesome.
Hey, Matt. Thanks for being with us, man.
Thank you for having me. It was an honor as I was making this thing to talk to Tom Curran, but as a person who's followed what's been going on from the outside looking in the last couple months, I like to call him Tom Stradamus, because he predicted everything, even though the world didn't give him credit for it.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
I'm only as good as the people telling me things, which is kind of, I look at the back half of the Patriots dynasty and what happened in 2017 on, And I look at it, Matt, and I don't want to get too far afield, but people like, it's not that bad. I'm like, it is that bad. I'm talking to these people. And finally, I think we get to not only hear what they had to say, and then some in the Dynasty. And that's what I think sets this production apart, is that we can filter it through Jeff Benedict or Phil Perry or myself or anybody who's talented enough and plugged in enough to cover it. But until you sit Gronk or Amendola or Slater, McCourty, Brady, Belichick, Kraft, Brandon Lloyd down, it's unfiltered.
Yeah, and I think, look, I wasn't a Patriots fan growing up, right? I root for the Packers. Some of my family members grew up near there, and I didn't know anything. But the thing that I started to realize as I dug into all the research is that, there had been great reporting done, and there had been, the Halberstam book, Education of a Coach, which had been sort of built through the beginning of the Dynasty through his eyes. There had been Tom's multiple documentary series that had been made, but those were always through specific lenses. And here we had an opportunity to finally talk to 70 plus players, coaches, front office execs, rivals. And it was just like, all right, yeah, look, we have all these people on the record, a lot of them for the first time. As much as anything, it's listening and letting them tell these stories, because they were actually there. And this is what they were going through in the room, in the moment. This isn't necessarily the 30,000-foot view, the academic, well, I've had all this time to reflect on this version of this story. This is, what was it like in 2017 while all this stuff was happening? And let's hear about it from the people that were there walking into that building every day.
I want to ask one quick thing, Phil, is to address, look, this is a Robert Kraft production in some ways. Jeff Benedict went to Robert, not your entire series, but hear me out. I saw the head cock. I understand. Jeff went to Robert, said, I'd like to do a book. I'd like to have your version of things told. And then Jeff wrote the book with Robert giving insight in a way he had never done. Plenty of interviews in the book, but certainly I think that fans on the outside look at this and say, well, this is a Robert Kraft. This is a puff piece for Kraft, a propaganda piece. I'd push back on that and say, look, all Robert can do is give the framework. When you sit people down in front of the camera, they're going to give their version of things.
Yeah,
so, go ahead,
look,
my friend.
No. I understand everybody has their preconceived notion of something. I think the answer is just watch the thing, right? And you'll instantly realize that that's as far from the truth as you could possibly imagine. Again, there's been a million different tellings of this story. A lot of them were through a very specific lens. But if you've got 70 people, and you got Ernie Adams, the director of football research, you've got Scott Pioli, and you've got Bill Belichick, and then you also have, everybody from Ty Law to Rob Gronkowski, Tom Brady, from the player's perspective. It's a collection of voices telling this story. It's not one specific lens. And that was so important to us when we were starting out, is this is not any one person's story. And it goes back to that line at the end when Pioli is talking about how it's almost insulting to even ask the question, is it Brady or is it Belichick? Because it is the collection of all these voices. And like I said, you got it. When you have this opportunity to talk to all these folks, a lot of your job is sitting back, asking decent questions, hopefully, and letting them talk and tell the story through their eyes.
Obviously, Matt, one of the most important voices when it comes to the period of time that you're covering is Bill Belichick's. And he obviously, famously, not all that willing to chat when it comes to the media. And so I'm wondering just how difficult it might have been to get him to participate and open up the way some other guys clearly did in the episodes that I've seen.
Yeah, so it's interesting. The project that I did before this was about Tiger Woods, and that came out in 2021. In that instance, it was sort of the opposite. I didn't have access to Tiger. I didn't have access to anybody in his inner circle. So, that's what made it dissimilar to this project. But the process of getting people to talk, whether in that case it was Steve Williams, who it took, Tiger's caddy, it took me, a year and a half plus of talking to him on the phone and saying, this is kind of what I'm thinking. And, this is how you can fit in. And this is why I think it's important, because everybody always says, what's in it for me? Like, why should I even do this? And I think the answer is always, this thing's going to get made one way or the other. And I want to make sure your perspective is represented. And that's the answer. That's the answer that I give everybody. And, you know, the other thing that I always tell people, because the thing they say is, well, how am I going to be portrayed? And I say, well, you're going to be portrayed somewhere between the version of yourself that you would sort of want it to look like, which is sort of the puff piece version. And it's somewhere between that and the version that your enemies would make if they were making something about you. And in the middle of that is where the truth probably lies, somewhere around that. And so that same discussion was had with pretty much everybody that was on this project, whether it was Bill, Ernie, Adam Vinatieri took a year and a half to try to get him to finally go on the record. And Adam's main concern, and you'll see this in the 2 episodes that are about to air on Friday, because this is, you know, the second episode is the snow game and arguably the greatest kick in NFL history, in my mind at least. You know, Adam's concern was, look, I get asked to do these things all the time. Is this actually going to be close? Is this actually going to be close to the definitive telling of the story? Are you actually going to get, you know, Tom and Bill and Robert? Are you going to be able to get Rob and Danny, who obviously he didn't play with, but, you know, he understood what it meant to have these people on the record. And so that was something that really mattered to a lot of these people is this going to be the one? And I hope when they watch this, all those conversations that we had about being fair and seeing it from everybody's perspective is there. And look, I think what's important is in those later episodes, 8, 9, and 10, when this thing starts to really unravel, that even if Bill wasn't willing to go there on the record and say, this is why Alex Guerrero was removed from the sideline or something like that, that, you know, people like Ernie could say things, and this was really important to me, and come in and say, look, we're not saying that these guys can't go see a person like Alex Guerrero outside of the building on their own free time, but you can't have somebody inside the building who's going against the strength and conditioning staff. And when I heard that, I was like, yeah, I totally get it.
Exactly.
And that's the thing that matters to me when I was making this thing is, look, it unraveled. Great. I understand why people are interested to understand why, but if you watch this thing and you can't understand why Bill stuck to his guns and kept doing things the way that he had for a number of years, and that culture that he created is what led to a lot of those trophies. If you can't see it from his eyes just as well as you can see it from Tom's and everybody else's, then we failed at our job. And so that's what was important. Sorry, go ahead, Tom.
And that's what's really cool about this is you see that if you watch those later episodes, and I kind of said it, and you used the quote that I had in that 2016 episode after the Super Bowl, I said, that's when things changed. Brady self-actualized, and there are plenty of people to then explain why. And that's how 2017 went the way it did.
But you can understand that, right?
You could say that Brady threw the first punch.
Yeah, and I mean, you could say that, but you also understand why, right?
Yeah.
Because one of the things that you talked about it, but also Michael Holley talks about it when in the 9th episode, where he says you have to think of the arc of their relationship, and I'll go into what he says, but that's what's most important about the telling of the story. Also, besides the fairness aspect that we talked about, it's also that this is a 10 episode movie that plays out over time, right? This is not the thing where like this episode is going to be this island, and then what happens next is going to be totally unrelated to what happened before. And, you know, we all grew up watching the same movies. I love things like, you know, movies like Goodfellas or whatever, right? But you know, you have to set the table and meet the characters, and they have to start out one way, and then eventually in Goodfellas you get to the point where he's, you know, getting chased by the helicopters and, you know, all that stuff, right? But it is an arc, and you see in a way, and it sounds a little silly, but you see in a way Brady and Belichick almost falling in love with each other in these early episodes, and realizing why without each other and Robert, they would never have been able to accomplish the things that they did. And then for me, one of the most crucial moments, even though it isn't like one of the, you know, what would be called sort of the sexy episodes, is the 5th episode when Brady goes out the first game of the season against Kansas City, right? And he's away from the team
that's so
that
well
year.
done by you guys.
And what he talks about is how hard it was for him to realize that the show goes on without you. And Bill is a genius, and one of the things that makes him a genius is his ability to adapt to whatever situation comes through. And in that situation, yes, they had the rest of the 07 team a lot of which came back from '08. So he had a lot of great pieces like Randy Moss, et cetera, Brewski. A lot of people were still there. But Bill was able to adapt, and the show did go on without Tom. And so what that sets up for the rest of the episodes is this tension, right?
Yes.
Of the guy who is always going to do, as he puts it, what's best for the team, right? And what that is a guy who can look at a piece of paper and say, quarterbacks fall off a cliff starting at a certain age. This guy eventually is going to fall off that cliff, just like everybody else. And if it happened with everybody else before, why is this guy going to be any different?
Yeah.
And meanwhile, in that season, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but like at the same time in that season, in '08, Tom says, how do I not break again? How do I not find myself on the operating room table? And I'm going to play till 45. So that episode sets up the tension that exists for the rest of the series, and ultimately is kind of the thing that made it all fall apart. So,
and I just don't want to run out of time with you.
Sorry. Go ahead, Tom.
Interminably. I'd let you go interminably, but it is. I mean, Brady replaced Bledsoe. Brady was pooping his pants because Castle played so well. It was a great episode with Castle, Phil. The Castle episode, I didn't expect to be, because I got to look at all previously. I saw them all online. I said, I don't know if I need the ACL one. Let me go to the drama stuff. After I watched the first three, let me go to the drama. And then I came back and said, this is a good episode too. The Hernandez episode is amazing. The Malcolm Butler reporting, even though we still don't get a friggin' answer, you get clarity on how effed up the decision was. But once Castle's there, and then again, okay, we're going to bring in Jimmy. Belichick kept saying to him, hey, you're no different. And then after winning the Super Bowl in 2016, Brady said, yeah, I know I'm not any different, but I think I'm different now, and I'm going to do stuff my own way. And really, the essence of it is Belichick goes, no, you're not different. I'll do to you what I did to everyone else.
Well, he stuck to his guns, right? And if
that's Bill or Tom.
Well, Bill did, right? He in a lot of ways. Okay, so if you're sitting there and you say, well, Bill never changed, why the hell would you? Right? It led to such incredible success. Why would you ever relent? Because he created this culture that is very, very hard to do in the modern era, especially as social media and all sorts of other things came into play in the story, where he, as Michael Holley says, him and Tom had this sort of, Tom was always willing to be the punching bag, I think is the line that Michael Holley has in episode 9. And that's part of the arc of their relationship. And so, we find ourselves in those later episodes at a time where you can completely watch what Tom did, and they're down 28-3. And what he does, I mean, you talk about movies, right? You talk about things like, those great sports movies that you loved growing up, when Rudy runs out into the field for the first time, when the Karate Kid finally, he does the crane kick. That 28-3 Super Bowl, and being able to watch that and hear those guys tell that story is one of the most cinematic stories I've ever seen in my entire life. It almost seems fake how incredible it was. And so if you're Tom Brady, or you're like, yeah, am I really I'm turning 40. Am I really still the punching bag here? I'm going to do what I think is best for me. And I understand that.
And that's whistling past the graveyard, Phil, because when he threw that pick and he's on his knees and they do a great job with the Robert Alford, and Nora Princiotti comes in and talks about the Globe deadline, and that was on the thing. Belichick's probably sitting on the sideline saying, next year it's Garoppolo. I am done watching this. I mean, he was probably at 28-3 out the MF door.
Yeah, and you can understand why, Tom probably felt that. Whether we're in the locker room after the divisional round that year, Tom's been out, Garoppolo had come in for 4 games. We're in the locker room and Bill starts tearing into the team. Meanwhile, if you watch closely in that footage, one of the things that's incredible is in the background, Rupert Murdoch and Les Moonves are there. These are the 2 rival CEOs of the networks that cover football. They're there. Rupert Murdoch has like a Patriots hoodie on, which is an incredible sight to see. It speaks to like the power that team had in that moment. And what these 2 sort of titans of the industry are getting to witness is this team is about to go to their 9th, whatever it was at that time. I'm sure I'm wrong, but like AFC championship in a row. And meanwhile, the coach is just tearing into the greatest quarterback of all time. So you can imagine what it was like to be Tom that season, to be out 4 games, the thing that he talked about fearing happening again. He comes back. He's still getting yelled at, and then he goes off and he pulls off the most incredible sort of comeback in sports history. It's just, look, you had it in the headline of your article, but I like to say it, this is not X's and O's. This is Shakespeare, but it happens to be with football.
It's really interesting that, when you're talking about the arc of their relationship and how things unraveled, it does feel like, after having just watched the second episode, Matt, and you mentioned Adam Vinatieri and how hard it was to get him. I thought he had one of the best lines in the first two episodes, which is, in that moment in the snowball after they won that game, he really felt as though because they didn't have a star quarterback, they were able to share an ownership of the team. He says at one point, it's not even Robert's team, but it's not Bill's team. It's not Tom's team. I would add in, it's not Drew's team. They didn't have that star player. So everyone felt like they were part of it. And I wonder if Bill Belichick, for his entire coaching career thereafter, is trying to recapture that feeling. And if he felt as though Brady was taking away any of that, that led to some of the fraying of their relationship.
Would you blame him if that's exactly how he looked at it? And the answer for me is no. But again, this is why it's complicated and nuanced. You can also see things exactly from Brady's perspective, and you can see things from Robert's perspective, and you can see it from all the different people that were there over the time. And look, like I said, I didn't know anything about the story when I started, and I had no skin in the game here. But to be able to talk to these guys and watch this thing unfold, it was a huge honor. And I just hope ultimately that the guys that were there who gave me their time, including Tom Curran, feel like we told the story as fairly and honestly as possible. And that's ultimately my test for whether or not we did it the right way.
It's brilliant. We know we're on limited time because you are bouncing around, but I do want to ask you this
Yeah.
question because it really stuck out to me as we watched it. Isn't the Bill Belichick transformation personality-wise astounding when you look at the person? And he wasn't Don Rickles when he came here in 2000. But you're going to watch those 2000 episodes, 2001 of the press conferences and who he was, and just be stunned at the stark difference between who he was then and how he is now. And it wasn't just happening in the last 2 or 3 years.
No, and I think Scott Pioli actually speaks to that a little bit he doesn't speak to it directly about how he is in the press conferences, but in the fourth episode, when we start to get into, I think to me, that's one of the most, I know it's about Spygate and probably a subject that Bill wishes we weren't going into great detail about, but I think that is an episode where you have more sympathy and understanding for Bill Belichick, and you see the team rally around him, having gone what he had to go through. But the betrayal that he may or may not have felt when Eric Mangini, his former mentee, sort of rats him out at the Jets. One of the things that Scott says in that episode is Bill retreated from those of us that he was closest to. And also probably, though nobody actually says this on the record, you can see him retreating in a lot of ways and sort of saying, why would I go out and continue to be the same person that I've been all this time? And I think that's you can completely understand that from his perspective and see it that way. So I love that episode, and really getting to get inside Bill's head and also get to watch that team go on that march through the 2007 season and destroy everybody in their path and have a great time doing it.
It was incredible. Even though it ends in a heartbreaking fashion, it does underscore how incredible that team was. That was the most, in some ways, uplifting episodes of it, because you're like, if you're a football fan, you're like, oh my God, look at these guys. And Belichick is, and we'll bleep this out, them all. And you hear it over and over again. And I got to ask you this. I know we're over, but I'm asking it. He is an intimidating interview subject, to say the least. Regardless, I don't care that he's not commanding armies. I don't care that he's only a football coach. He's an intimidating presence. I've known him and know him, and I'm as comfortable as I could be asking him difficult questions, and I still replay him in my mind, and I can feel my stomach in a knot because I know what I'm going to ask him is going to be uncomfortable. You don't know him, Matt, and you had to ask him the most difficult questions, knowing that he knows that you know what other people have already said. How hard was it? And he did address you by name in one question.
So here's the thing. I have so much respect for Bill. And the thing that I love about Bill, and I think a lot of other people who are Patriots fans love about him, is this is the guy that was always ahead of the curve, always letting the people go a year early rather than a year late, right? And then I think of him in game situations where in that 07 season we were just talking about against the Washington football team, they're up 40 something to nothing. And it's the fourth down in the fourth quarter. And instead of kicking a field goal, he goes for it. And the score goes up to 50 something to nothing.
Yep.
And there's a reporter afterwards who says, "Why'd you do that?" And he says, "What do you want me to do? Kick a field goal?" And that's what I love about Bill Belichick.
He's right.
He's
That's more insulting. I
Yeah.
never thought of it until that day.
Well, and then and then it takes me back to this moment that happened this past season. And I was this is me on from the outside looking in because we really didn't cover that season. But there was all these people that sort of speculating that in the 16th or 17th week of the season that Andy Reid sort of took it easy on him, right, and didn't score on him at the very end. I don't think that's how you honor Bill Belichick. You honor Bill Belichick by treating him with the same respect and determination and desire to win that he's treated everybody else in the best way possible. So I had no hesitancy in saying I'm going to sit there and I'm going to ask him the exact same questions that I've asked every other person that sits down in that chair and answers. The difference is, in some cases, Bill didn't want to answer those questions, which is why you hear me asking it. When other people just answer the question, their answer just goes in, right? So that's what it was like. It was just, hey, I really respect this guy, and I'm gonna ask him the questions that need to get asked. And I think some of those answers, even if he doesn't say a lot of words, when he's up on the lectern and he's just saying we're on to Cincinnati, there's no context to the soundbite that he's saying, right? In this situation, he's surrounded by all these other people giving the answers and giving their perspective on things. And sometimes the few words that he does say speak volumes.
How did you decide when to cut
You mean
his facial expression?
Oh, I don't know. You just
It
look.
was really interesting because like he would answer something and go, "Yeah, we've talked about that."
Well, look,
And then he would do this. This was the best though.
well,
And you let it
everybody's
roll.
Yeah, look, that's the thing that's so great about the visual medium of making a documentary, in particular, making something about football, is it is by far the most cinematic sport on the planet. And getting to watch these people, look, as a documentary filmmaker, sometimes the thing that interests me more than anything else is when you start to see somebody process a question and then give their answer, because those facial expressions tell you as much about them and what they're thinking and things like that as anything else does. So we thought about all of that. And, just like we have the person who was the New Jersey State police officer who actually confiscated the tape at the Meadowlands that ended up being the tape that would become sort of the Spygate scandal.
He's insufferable.
And then when he
It's a
I love
Patriots
that
fan
guy.
perspective.
Yeah. And then later in the episode when we're talking about the Mangini stuff, he comes back in and he says, betrayal, it's a really hard thing to swallow. And right when he does, he actually swallows and you see it. And we let that moment play out because those moments are just as good as some of the words that people say. And so, yeah, everything. We paid attention to everything, and there was a ton of attention to detail in this. And look, I hope people enjoy it and feel like we got it right.
We're gonna. Philly, any closing words?
They're going to. No, I know we got to let Matt go, but it's just so well done. And again, I would encourage people, even the biggest of Patriots fans, you're going to find so many new elements, whether it's video, sound from the time covered, or these phenomenal interviews that you did, Matt. It really is. It's fantastic.
Well, thanks for having me on, and I'd love to talk to you guys about this more in the future. So let's not make this just one.
No, 100%. Let's do
All
it,
right.
and we'll try and keep it tighter the next time because we
Sounds
gotta get you back for the Dion Branch, Brandon Lloyd, Aaron Hernandez one, because it's literally a moving episode. But what am I talking about that for? We got the first two dropping on Friday. Matt, get out of here. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Apple TV Plus. See you guys soon.
Thanks, Matt.
The guy's on a media tour. We're going to have him on some of the post-game Dynasty programs, which we're going to do over the next 5 weeks. We have Benedict on Friday, but Phil, if you're a football fan and a Patriots fan, we could do it for an hour because it's
No
fresh
doubt.
eyes.
Fresh eyes. And I just finished watching the second episode. I watched the first one last night, and one lingering question I have for Matt, and I would love to ask him the next time we talk to him, is just who he felt like the best interview was. Who was the best? There have to be favorites, and I wonder if one of them's Ernie Adams. And I was stunned to see. Well, number one, he does take a shot at you and me and our profession at the very beginning, where he calls the media the scribes, but they're really guys who don't know anything about what they're talking about. But then Tom, he seems to be a heavy participant. They do a whole reenactment of him driving to the stadium in the snow for the Snow Bowl, that they had to have, he has to be open to welcoming them to his home and getting in his car and setting up cameras. And this was not just a 1 hour sit down with Ernie Adams. He's involved. And so Patriots fans will love hearing from him. They'll love seeing things like Bill Belichick addressing the locker room after the final game at the old Foxborough Stadium, which obviously was the Snow Bowl, and the camera there, because it was so cold and people are so hot and sweaty in there, having to wipe the fog off the lens just to be able to shoot what's going on in there, and to hear guys in the locker room talk about themselves as champs. They break down the huddle saying 1, 2, 3 champs. And it's like, whoa, boys, you just won the divisional round. Like, you still got a few more games to go here. But that's how they felt, as though this thing was almost divinely inspired, this run that they were on.
Yeah.
And so there are moments like that Patriots fans are absolutely going to love.
And my favorite quote of the first 2 episodes, because I'm sitting there after the first episode, I'm like, whoa. This is a 30,000 foot view of the 2001 Patriots. For anyone who was in Boston or New England, they remember it and sentient at the moment. You understood that at least half of the fan base and a significant portion of the media was all set with Drew Bledsoe. Pat, boom. And it's enough. He didn't make decisions quickly enough. He was aloof. He was world weary, and he wasn't playing well. They were 5-13 under Bledsoe during Belichick's tenure. They missed the playoffs in '99 with an array of still very good players. But when you look at the first episode, it's very makes Bledsoe sound like Dan Marino, and he really wasn't. And people realized that, and Belichick realized that, because he undressed him constantly, whether he was the Browns head coach or the Jets defensive coordinator. So that's why that contract given Bledsoe was very much related to the 2001 erection of CMGI Field. They needed a hood ornament. So going into the 2001 season, they were the worst team in football, basically. Really bad. And they were projecting as continuing on in that vein. In 2001, they started 0-2, but thank God they had Drew Bledsoe, because that's a hood ornament to help sell for the new field. But they did put a trap door in Bledsoe's contract, which they ended up exercising to get away from him, because Brady was better. He was better in training camp. He was better in the preseason. And you could tell the team would move. And I'm not just saying that in hindsight. I said it the day after Bledsoe got hurt. I had a long argument, as we always did, with Ron Borges. I said, Bledsoe's never going to get his job back. He is the wrong guy at the wrong time for this team. He's not going to get his job back. He's too slow to get rid of the ball. I said to him the night he got hurt, I walked behind Borges' thing. I said, hey, don't go easy on the quarterback just because he got a boo-boo. And I didn't know that it was a sheared artery. So in my defense, Borges didn't like that. We used to argue all the time. Anyway.
Can I also just add, though, that you're right about like how there are things in these early episodes that play differently than you remember them. And one of them for me is the regular season loss to the Rams. That appears to be Brady crashing back down to earth, and the Patriots are just the old Patriots again. And boy, they don't really have a chance, do they? And I remember vividly that game. It was a big game. Obviously, it's the best team in football. It's a primetime game. And I remember talking about it with my friends in the cafeteria, the basement of the McElroy building at BC High, my sophomore year at BC High. And that was not the conversation. It was, damn, can you believe they almost beat the Rams? That's what it was. And I know Brady threw 2 picks and he might have lost them the game because of those turnovers, but it was not a sad sack sort of reaction to that game, in my opinion, at least for, the fans that I was close to and talking to at the time. It was, holy shit, this team might actually be pretty good.
And within the locker room, that was the attitude too. We can play with these guys. We can physical these guys. We're not going to make the same mistakes later. And they didn't know they were going to play them in the Super Bowl, but they absolutely felt as if they could go toe to toe with them. And that's why, and that's where it ends. And the second episode starts with, well, why did Bill stick with this kid? They've created attention. And they're like, well, why did Bill stick with this kid who just crashed to earth in the last episode? And that's the point I was getting to with Ernie Adams. Is the best quote in the first 2 episodes is, and Scott Pioli, who's very funny and he's a good friend, and he talks about Ernie. He says, so I'm walking past Ernie's office and he's like, Scott, get in here. Scott, get in here.
He does a great Ernie impression.
He does an incredible Ernie Adams. And he's like, Ernie, what? And Ernie's pointing at and you'll see all this, folks, and you'll enjoy the shit out of it. Look at Drew. It's like a wildebeest getting attacked.
This is what we've been talking about.
This is what, and that's what it was with Bledsoe. And it's just, he knew the rush was coming and he wasn't afraid of it. He didn't cower. He wasn't Tony Eason, but he's like, well, I got to protect the ball. And he did. He was a wildebeest. I remember writing this. I used to call him, he's as mobile as a bird bath. He just stands there. So
can I also just say for the Patriots Talk podcast fans out there?
Yes, bro.
You're going to get a couple quick glimpses, and I've only seen 2 episodes, and I know there's more Tom Curran in later episodes, but you're going to get a couple quick glimpses of TC, and my goodness, the man hasn't changed. He's there in the press conference with his baseball hat on, some sort of golf-y kind of pullover, and a large hot Dunkin' cup in his hand with his computer bag thrown over his shoulder. It's the same guy. Like, I've seen that guy. That's the same guy who shows up to the press conferences at Gillette Stadium 20 years later. Yeah. It's great. And, Felger's in there. Michael Hawley with the dreads. You get a shot of him at one point. It's, some of the beat guys who now are no longer on the beat, but are legends of the beat. You get the old Sports Final clip with Bob Ryan, Bob Lobel, and Steve Burton and Dan Shaughnessy. And Ryan calls Lobel a provocateur. You're being a provocateur, saying that Brady should have the job over Bledsoe, aren't you? You're just trying to come up with an argument for the sake of having an argument. It's great. That's
so interesting. Is when you watch these first 2 episodes, that's the lines along which things were drawn. It was old traditional media, the Globe, in essence, Borges, Cafardo, Ryan, Shaughnessy, et al., who weren't watching practices every day and didn't notice that Bledsoe was on borrowed time and his own inefficiencies. And the people who were watching practices every day, myself and Felger, were beat writers for the Metro West Daily News and the Boston Herald. Like, this kid's friggin' good. What are we watching here? Every single time he goes out in a preseason game, he looks brilliant. Every time he's in practice, he looks brilliant. He's quicker than Drew. He's more decisive than Drew. He's good. So everybody thought it was a dog and pony show and there was no way Drew would lose his job. And we're all sitting there going, and I actually, was speaking to people within the organization as well I remember the first time I heard from somebody well high up in the organization was when I called Brady, he's a franchise hood ornament. And they called me directly and said, that's exactly what he is. That's exactly what he is. And showed the resistance to the idea that the world had to revolve around Drew. That's enough for today. Phil, great stuff. Again, see you tomorrow night at 6:00 where we'll do this. We'll see you tonight. I have BST. Phil, what do you got, early edition?
Oh, yeah. Right. Hour-long early edition with Albert Breer and Trenny and whoever else wants to show up.
Well, it's early edition with Tony Casey, so
Right.
of course. Our Bella early edition. All right, thank you, Skull Crusher. We love you.